Good morning. It is wonderful to see everybody here. I know this is a technical topic in a challenging time, so I'm glad you're here to listen to a little bit of a discussion about AI risks to election security. This is our group of panelists. Rex will be giving the keynote, and Caleb, who is co-author of the book that's up here, of which there are copies in the back. However, before we start, this is a test to Rex. I asked ChatGPT, what are the AI risks to election security for the US presidential election? Because I thought maybe I would ask ChatGPT what it thought of itself. And here's what it said. I'm not asking you to read everything because I'm going to flip through these slides, but I just want you to get an idea of what AI generates when, at least occasionally, it's being thoughtful. What are its risks? So you can see it tells you that there are risks. And then it proceeds to go on for several pages about what the risks it thinks it is to election security. Disinformation, manipulation of public opinion. I'm sure Rex is going to cover all this, but I just wanted to see if he was ahead of ChatGPT. Cybersecurity threats, automated misinformation amplification, undermining voter confidence, adversarial attacks. Okay, so it's pretty cognizant that it's like a risk. Threats, privacy, and data security. And then it has its mitigation strategies, which is a very short paragraph with only a few sentences. The good news is that at least some AI capabilities know that they pose a risk to things that we hold dear. Bad news is that it's not very good. Now, I probably could have egged it on to being a little more specific, but its mitigation strategies were a bit weak. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts to tell us for real what the risks are. All yours, Rex.
Thank you. Let's start with a game. Two quick questions for the audience. First, what is this? Are we hearing cat in the room?
Yeah, we're hearing cat.
Okay. And how about this?
Stop
Stop sign. Okay, good. Keep those in mind because I'm going to come back to those at the end of the presentation. But first, a little bit about the book. The book is called The AI Conundrum. MIT published the book in August. Caleb is the lead author. He actually began programming when he was 10. By 14, he had learned the original programming language for AI called Lisp, which was developed in the 1950s at MIT. And when he attended an MIT AI conference in the Bay Area, he was having better conversations than I was having with some of the CTOs of some of the biggest, most important companies in Silicon Valley. And at 18, he had written a thesis paper about the fundamental limitations of AI because he thought people were misunderstanding what AI was capable of and how it worked, and that could create some challenges. He wrote it while he was at Sage Ridge. The year earlier, he went to Harvey Mudd for his math, and he went to Stanford his senior year for his math because he'd run out of math in the Reno area. He had a pretty sophisticated understanding of AI. I myself had been working in machine learning for almost 30 years at that point. I was the first director of research at Wired and had applied neural networks to try to personalize web experiences. In 1998, Wired wrote a cover story after I had left about my work, as well as Amazon's work and the work of NSA, which were the three organizations they decided to profile for how we were understanding people's data and what we could do with that data. So it was quite interesting for me to be standing this weekend in Monterey and presenting in a room that I had presented 28 years earlier at the dawn of the internet. And I was presenting from this book to some bankers. And what I had realized was that in many ways, while I'd come full circle back to the exact same room in the Monterey Plaza Hotel overlooking the ocean with whales crusting the water as I was presenting, it occurred to me that really, if you were to ask me to estimate the AI influence compared to the internet influence, I would say that AI has at least an order of magnitude larger impact that we will see in the coming years compared to what I was seeing at the early days of the internet. So this is a big deal. And the heart of the conundrum that we see is that there's a massive economic incentive for media owners such as ByteDance and Google and Meta, et cetera, to continue to make their algorithms more powerful. There's a massive incentive for businesses to make the algorithms more powerful. There's a massive incentive for governments to make them more powerful. And the reason is because it can save time, it can save cost, it can allow us to do things that we couldn't do without AI. Yet every step we take to make AI more powerful so we can reap the benefits of AI, we are also increasing the danger to us as a society. And the AI, as it becomes more powerful, can have a greater influence on manipulating our attitudes and our behaviors. And I'm going to unpack how that works. And really the whole point of the book is as a public education effort, especially part one, the part that Caleb wrote, it shows people how it works to get beyond the headlines that we read in the news media, beyond the kind of superficial discussions about AI, to really understand things about exactly what the math is doing and what's not doing. So I encourage you to grab a copy of the book, to engage in these type of conversations and discussions. There's also a lot of more material on the website, ai-conundrum.com. We have a whole section on academic resources that are being provided to different universities and professors that are already teaching from this material to really help educate as many people as we can on what AI really is and how it's working. There are a lot of topics I could talk about today: deepfakes, misinformation, AI influence. Maureen's AI summary was a good summary of the landscape of issues. The one I'm going to focus on is going to be on AI influence. And I want to really unpack how that works, because I think if we understand more about what's going on there and how it works, we can understand some of the risk and think about some of the ways that we might approach solutions in the future. I'm going to start off, and I'm going to take a little bit of a 8-minute video that's worth playing based upon some of the investigative journalism of the Wall Street Journal, looking at the TikTok algorithm specifically and how it works. I've edited it down to 8 minutes. It's a phenomenal resource to think about what the algorithms are actually doing and how they work. And then I'm going to unpack some of the work that I've been doing in the area in marketing and how those algorithms work. Really what we need to do when we think about AI's role in influencing attitudes and behaviors, and then we'll come back to some of the other topics that Maureen had put up there. This focuses mostly on the TikTok algorithm, but it also applies directly to YouTube, Facebook, X, really many of the other algorithms. So join me in this video here.
Okay, has anyone else noticed that your For You page has been a little too accurate lately? It hasn't been things that I'll Google or I talk about. It's been thoughts.
TikTok knows everything about us. To understand how it knows users so well, the Wall Street Journal created over 100 automated TikTok accounts, or bots, that watched hundreds of thousands of videos on the app. We also spoke to current and former executives at the company. Officially, the company says that shares, likes, follows, and what you watch all play a role in what TikTok shows you. We found that TikTok only needs one of these to figure you out: how long you linger over a piece of content. Every second you hesitate or rewatch, the app is tracking you.
I just want to quiet the noise.
Through this one powerful signal, TikTok learns your most hidden interests and emotions and drives you deep into rabbit holes of content that are hard to escape. The TikTok experience starts the same way for everyone. Open the app and you'll immediately see an endless string of videos in your For You feed. Take this new user, a 24-year-old from Henry County, Kentucky. TikTok starts by serving the account a selection of very popular videos vetted by app moderators. Is this person religious?
Because I still have a purpose and you still hold a plan for my life.
Do they want to participate in viral dances? Are they feeling down lately?
Just remember.
What TikTok doesn't know is that the 24-year-old from Kentucky isn't a person at all. It's one of the bot accounts programmed by the Wall Street Journal. Let's call it Kentucky 96. We set up these accounts to understand how TikTok figures out your unexpressed interests. We assigned each bot a date of birth and an IP address, which told TikTok their location. None were given a gender. We gave each bot or user interests, but those interests were never entered into the app. The only way our users expressed their interests was by rewatching or pausing on videos with related hashtags or images. Some were into extreme sports. Others were interested in forestry, or dance, or astrology.
I'm not the babysitter, I'm not the parent.
Or some other topic.
Keep scrolling if you hate animals.
For all our accounts, we found that TikTok draws users in at first by serving a wide variety of videos, many with millions of views. Then, as the algorithm sees what you respond to, the selection of videos and the view counts can get lower and lower, with fewer of them vetted by moderators to see if they violate TikTok's terms of service. In fact, TikTok fully learned many of our accounts' interests in less than 2 hours. Some it figured out in less than 40 minutes.
On YouTube, more than 70% of the views come from the recommendation engine. So it's already huge, but on TikTok, it's even worse. It's probably like 90-95% of the content that is seen that comes from the recommendation engine.
This is a visualization made from hashtags attached to the videos our bots watched. Think of it as a partial view of the universe of TikTok content. Here's where we find dance videos. Over here are the cooking videos. The spindly arms stretching out of the center represent niche content areas. This arm starts with general videos of cute animals. But if we follow it out to the end, we find more specific videos for enthusiasts of French bulldogs. As Kentucky 96 starts its journey, it starts moving around within the mainstream, where TikTok is trying to puzzle out what it wants. We programmed Kentucky 96 to be interested in sadness and depression. Let's see how long it takes TikTok to figure that out. Less than 3 minutes into using TikTok, at its 15th video, Kentucky 96 pauses on this.
And that love goes for a friend, family, or any relationship.
Kentucky 96 watches the 35-second video twice. Here, TikTok gets its first inkling that perhaps the new user is feeling down lately.
Whoever comes, let them come. Whoever stays, let them stay. Whoever goes, let them go.
The information contained in this single video provided the app with important clues. The author of the video, the audio track, the video description, the hashtags. After Kentucky 96's first sad video, TikTok serves another one 23 videos later, or after about 4 more minutes of watching.
I'll leave you alone from now on if that's what you want.
This one is a breakup video with the hashtag sad. Other information from your phone, including location, can impact the videos that are shown in a user's feed.
As a Kentuckian, I never thought I'd lose my freedom over a virus.
For instance, Kentucky 96 saw lots about Kentucky, but whether or not it keeps showing you that type of video depends on your response to it. Based on the videos rewatched so far, TikTok thinks that maybe this user wants to see more about love, breakups, and dating. So at about 80 videos and 15 minutes in, the app starts serving more about relationships. But Kentucky 96 isn't interested. After about 36 minutes of total watch time, TikTok's understanding of Kentucky 96 takes shape. Videos about depression and mental health struggles outnumber those about relationships and breakups. From here on, Kentucky 96's feed is a deluge of depressive content. 93% of videos shown to the account are about sadness or depression. We showed our data and many of the videos seen by Kentucky 96 to Shazlo.
What we see on TikTok is a bit the same that what we saw on YouTube. So basically, the algorithm is detecting that this depressing content is useful to create engagement and pushes depressing content. So the algorithm is pushing people towards more and more extreme content, so it can push them toward more and more watch time.
Many of the journal's bots were rapidly pushed deep into rabbit holes. TikTok learned our bots' most far-flung interests, like astrology. But even bots with general mainstream interests got pushed to the margins as their recommendations got more personalized and narrow. Bots with a general interest in politics wound up being served videos about election conspiracies and QAnon.
First order of business is impeach Biden and Kamala. It goes from the House to the Senate.
Deep in the niche worlds of TikTok, users are more likely to encounter potentially harmful content that is less vetted by moderators and violates the app's terms of service.
Make them angry and sad. They would be so much happier without you.
There's a lot of fun, silly, and life-affirming content on TikTok. But while TikTok can draw out what makes you laugh, it can also make you wallow in your darkest thoughts.
Turning the pain from mental to physical work.
Without ever needing to eavesdrop on you or collect any personal information about you.
Whether it's on TikTok, on Facebook, on YouTube, we're interacting with algorithm in our everyday life more and more. We are training them and they're training us. So we have to study this so we understand it better and we don't let it go in directions that are harmful to society or to certain groups of people.
We are training algorithms and they are training us. That's a key observation. And I want to turn to some of how those algorithms work and unpack that further so we have a deeper understanding of what's going on. And I want you to think about something, not quite as controversial as American politics, about American baseball. Think about which of these ads, if I were to show that to you, would most likely to get you to want to go and buy a ticket to a baseball game. Is it the one focused on the food, on the ballpark experience, or seeing game under the summer night lights, or focus on the player, for example? This is some work that I did with Major League Baseball and some of the different teams, and we were using a unsupervised learning AI algorithm that looks at which exposure to different messages are most likely to lead to a ticket sale and then works backwards to decide in milliseconds which ad it should show to any given person based upon the data that we can observe about them. So, for example, to show you how subtle these algorithms can be, this is the same ad, one focused on night game, one focused on imagery of the day game, same message. And what we can see is that the ad that the AI would deliver to you depends on the time of day. From 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., you're about a third more likely to buy a baseball ticket if you are shown the night game ad. So during the evening, the night game ad, it seems irrelevant and it's more likely to sell tickets. If you happen to be a shift worker and you are working from midnight to 3 a.m. and you're up, you do not want to see any more nighttime. You want to see the daytime ad, and that ad is more than twice as likely to result in buying a ticket. And in fact, if I want to influence you, you can see that there's a lot more tickets sold from that midnight to 3 a.m. ad when you're looking for something to do. To play that out, this is what the data looks like with a heat map, where the AI is looking at all those different versions of the food or the player or the scoreboard and what the message says, what the call to action is, and so forth. And this is the AI lighting up and changing by day which message it should be delivering. We have seen cases like with the Tampa Bay Rays where there was an injury and that injury led people to be more engaged with that specific ad, with that specific player, but only if the call to action said learn more. And all that subtlety is a type of influence that in this case we might see as fairly benign. It's just getting you to buy a ticket sale. But if that same type of influence that we're seeing here and able to measure that can change the people's likelihood of buying a ticket sale from anywhere from 23% in the case of the Braves to 133% in the case of the Giants, effectively doubling the conversion rate, significantly influencing people's behavior, then we need to recognize these same algorithms have an influence when they are talking to us about politics or our belief systems overall. So when we think about how AI learns, which will influence our behavior, it is in essence looking at different message features, different types of headlines and imagery and stories, and it's taking in audience feature data like what time of day we're visiting the website, what website we're on, how many messages we've seen, whether we're on an Android or an iPhone, whether we're on a desktop or a mobile device, and any other data that might be combined with it, like with the weather data, any first-party data or data that the company or actor knows about to influence that behavior. When we looked at the Giants, for example, we could see down to the neighborhood level how different messages had different appeal. If you look at these segments of young digerati and country squires, they're about 30 to 40% more likely to buy a ticket to a baseball game overall, but we can see that their reaction is to different messages. The fan-oriented ad is more likely to influence the country squire, whereas the player-influenced ad is a little bit more likely to influence the young digerati. So down to the individual precinct level, down to the zip code level, down to the household level, down to the person within a household level, these AI algorithms are capable to learn what is most likely to influence attitudes and behaviors. And the subtlety of differentiating the messages for different people and different times is incredibly powerful. It's not so powerful that every single person is going to be convinced, but on the margin, the ability to influence thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people is certainly within the capability of the AI algorithms. Now, we know they work because we do a lot of science on there. I've personally measured over thousands and thousands of different advertisements over my career in business. And we do it through very careful experimental design. This is effectively the AI, the same messages for the giants randomly delivered. And we can see how many tickets are sold from that. We can compare that to when AI is on. And what the AI right here is learning overall is that the ad that you're more likely to influence behavior is focused on the player, which makes sense because it's about baseball and about the athletes for a lot of people and watching them perform as a team. But for some people, it's the fan experience. And in certain dates, the fan experience becomes more important. And then the stadium experience, a little bit less important. These tend to spike around holidays like Mother's Day. And of course, there's maybe some interpretation about you want to take mom to a baseball game for Mother's Day. That's very nice. For about 20% of the people, that's a stronger motivation and more likely to lead to that ticket sale. And we can measure the difference in behavior between when AI is on and when AI is off. We can trend that over time. In this case, it was 133% difference in behavior caused by the AI acting and learning dynamically, which message was going to be most likely to influence behavior. I share that detail with you to let you know that at an industrial scale level, there is use of the AI algorithms to both respond to and influence our attitudes and behaviors. Most of that's commercial behavior, but any of these technologies are, as they're termed, dual use technologies. They can be used for good purposes or they can be used for negative purposes. Certainly when we try to influence people's behavior in politics, there's a line that we can become concerned about. Now, some of you may have heard about Carol Smith from Wilmington, North Carolina, and Facebook in the last election cycle. This was a very important part of what Facebook's algorithm was doing. Carol Smith is from Wilmington. She's a mom. She's a Christian. She liked Fox News and POTUS. And that was it. That's all that Facebook knew about her. But with that, within 2 days, her content began to become quite extreme. It began to promote QAnon within 2 days, and within less than a week, it had content that violated Facebook's policy on hate speech and so forth. Now, that image is AI generated because Carol Smith does not exist. It was part of an experiment that Facebook was doing internally to understand what its algorithm was doing in terms of pushing people into rabbit holes, people like Carol. It was not meant to be released. It was released by a whistleblower, and it was reported on by the Wall Street Journal and others. And it was an incredibly important insight about how difficult it is for these media companies to moderate their content, or the choices that they make and the trade-offs they make in terms of whether they are going to try to manage their algorithms and so forth. The reality is that what the algorithm is trying to solve for is for engagement. And it's really somewhat oftentimes the tail wagging the dog, because it might be the engagement difference between 1 in 2,000 people engaging with something and 2 people in 2,000 people engaging the content. So it's not something that most of us would want as content, but just that small light signal is enough to where it projects to everyone else who has a Christian affiliation, or everybody else who lives in the North Carolina area, or everybody else who matches these characteristics of being a mom or liking Fox News and so forth. And so you might have something that really appeals to a very, very small niche of group of people, but it becomes amplified and played back again and again. And through that amplification, we know from a lot of the research that that can influence attitudes and behavior. There's a wonderful deep analysis from University of Chicago on some of the influence, for example, around the pandemic, of how different hosts on Fox who had different points of view and perspectives, how that led to different outcomes in people getting vaccinated and, in fact, hospitalization and so forth. When we think about the quotes from the analysis that Carol's experience became a barrage of extreme conspiratorial and graphical content, within really days of that profile coming up, we all should be somewhat guarded about what type of content we're seeing in our platform and whether it's reinforcing our echo chambers and our beliefs both on the left and the right. There are very few ways that we can get outside of that echo chamber because these systems require us to be logged in. It's not exactly easy to escape the way the algorithm is going to push content to us. And the reality is that some of the other research shows that if the content is focused on anxiety, it actually is about 60% more likely to get us to engage with that content than if it's hopeful content. As a result, the content that we have seen as algorithms have played more and more of a role in news and content creation is really a decrease in neutral or joy-oriented content and an increase in content that focuses on anger, fear, and sadness. This is a longitudinal analysis of sentiment looking at 23 different million headlines in various news outlets. And there's a little bit of a difference between left and right, but overall, both of them in the past decade have been trending more towards that anger, fear, and disgust. It's an area that I think, again, we as citizens can be aware of and try to think about how we might try to engage and change things. And that's just potentially what we're doing to ourselves. If you look at what non-US citizens are doing, China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia being most active, there is an active effort to create fake Twitter accounts, or X now, Facebook accounts, LinkedIn accounts, etc., so that they can have an influence and play different roles and seem like they are authentically from our neighborhood or from our community, and to influence the dialogue and influence the discussion. And through their engagement, they themselves can actually push the content more towards the rabbit holes, because it doesn't take a whole lot of signal of different profiles matching different things for the algorithms to reinforce certain narratives. These are content that's been reported just last week in the unclassified one-page memo of what's happening right now in our 2024 election. Note the work of Russia using AI for text, images, audio, video, and so forth. They were caught even doing non-AI stuff as well, like having a woman actor claiming that Kamala had been involved in some hit and run accident. And then there's tons of AI-generated content that goes even further. Iran and China, of course, are very active as well, but Russia is probably the most active at this point. I want to come back to that image of the cat in the stop sign. So you all saw that as a cat, but that image was subtly manipulated by AI to actually be identified as guacamole by the AI classifier. The way that that happens is you can take an image and you can use AI to figure out what pixels could I very subtly move around and move it into a classification of something else. And according to Stanford research, on average, across all the different images and things that we have, there are 19 different ways to change that image in very subtle ways that you would not recognize, yet it would fool the AI. So one of the biggest challenges that we have is trying to use AI to fight AI. If you know what the algorithm is doing to try to catch AI, you can manipulate the words or the images so that it can get by any AI classifier. So the offensive game of changing the images or creating deep fakes or creating fake content and hoping that AI will catch it is really an asymmetric battle that we are not likely to win. It's not shocking that a Marine's list of what AI thinks it can do to solve itself is not very deep, because the reality is that we do not have good technology or systems to catch AI. And even if we did, the ability for AI, for those systems to hack themselves in just subtle ways so that they can evade AI deepfake classifiers and so forth is quite strong. So there will always be this area where you have correct classification, misclassification, and we talk about this in the book and explain why that is the case and how that happens. But it's important to understand that any AI that is operating out in an open system is very hard to catch. That stop sign that you recognize as stop sign, this is actually seen by AI, self-driving cars, or one of the systems that they tested on, as a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit, because those stickers are strategically placed to fool the classifier. Anything that's sort of left out in that open environment is subject to that type of hacking or adversarial attack. In politics, in our free society, we exist in an open environment, and that will always be one of our risks. So the question becomes, what type of anecdotes might we come up with that might help us fight against some of these examples of propaganda-generated news sites that look like news sites? This is an example from France where this site looked almost identical to the real site, and it was linked very high up in search engines. So if you're looking for information, you'd lead to it, and yet it had false information about a 1.5% tax on every monetary transaction to support Ukraine, which was an effort by Russia to try to sow dissatisfaction with support of Ukraine in France, as an example. These are very hard to combat against. I think the challenge that we have to bring this home to the last couple points is that we get to a place where we have an ossification of opinion, where it becomes difficult for us to have open-minded discussions because we can become easily distrustful of any content, especially if it disagrees with our point of view and perspective, because it's easy enough to wave it away as being fake. And in many ways, it's difficult for us to tell what is fake and what is real. So we can anticipate some numbness and skepticism, distrust and dismissal, and this defensive mindset to become pretty commonplace as more and more fake information is flooding our news sources and search and debates and discussions. There are some potential anecdotes, and I'll end with a little bit of potential positivity. Some of you may know the news video and story, and sadly, if you look for the video, you're more likely to find the edited down one that was misleading than you were to see the full 15-minute video of the boxes being rolled in by election officials, staged in different places so they could be systematically counted over time. You're more likely to find the ones claiming these fake ballots were hidden underneath and so forth. Even after Giuliani has conceded that this was false and misleading, even after the full video came up, we still find disinformation or lies more prominent and easy to find. Some of the anecdotes we can do is that the news and shared content, AI can actually help vectorize videos and images like this so we can find ones that are similar, and we can begin to try to have a better curated database and information of what is, especially if information has been debunked, for what is the full context of the video, the full information. A second potential is that when we take a picture with a camera or something like that, it's potentially possible for the device itself to immediately upload the GPS and location of that device and use blockchain to create a hash and a timestamp so that we had a database of authentic information. And there is a company in Europe that's doing some of that now and trying to work with news organizations so that we can say, this is a source, this is the moment that was taken, this is the true content. And so if you are looking at another image and you want to compare it to the original, you can see if it has been altered or edited, and then to see the chain of what the edits were. That's another effort of different news organizations to try to work together. The upside for that is more instant verification. The downside, number one, is it hasn't been broadly adopted. And secondly, there are some concerns that erodes privacy because the people that might want to take a really good investigative video or journal, it will very much tell us who that was, which device they were using, and that in some countries can be quite risky. A third one might be journalistic standards. There's an effort to create a trust mark that this is a source that checks its sources, applies editorial review, separates news from opinion. It follows some basic standards, whether it's on the left or the right, they're following best practices. We haven't seen a trust mark like that take off, and people are pretty quick to read the headline and the information and not look much deeper. So maybe that will work, maybe it won't. I talked about AI detection systems. They can help, but right now we do know that it's fairly easy to evade the AI detection systems, as you saw in the cat example. And so I think probably the most important one, my final thought I'll give you, is the best country I see doing the best work in this area is Finland. They start in elementary school with teaching media literacy and how to check sources and look for information and promoting critical thinking in the assessment of the news and information we're getting. That's a system that we need to encourage. I think practicing intellectual humility and encouraging a mindset where we accept that we don't have all the answers. I know that I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to go through and investigate and hear people out and try to see, what is a true perspective. In some of your media, you can go into incognito mode and turn off your identity and look at what news comes in general instead of your rabbit hole. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in a lot of places where you log in, but it's something that you can try as well. And fifth and finally, what I really appreciate with this organization, NSF, and what Maureen's been doing and what Caroline's engaged with is promoting civil open discussion and helping build a community where we can have civil dialogue. And whether it's a round robin discussion with reflection where we're hearing each other and then playing back that we've listened and heard one another. I think that we have to accept we're in an open environment that will be under attack from AI, from outside actors and internal actors. Having this type of discussion and the ability to critically assess information is going to be our best defense. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rex. So now you have a little bit more insight into things like TikTok. So you've heard about the proposed TikTok ban, but you don't have to be on TikTok to be being targeted for this disinformation. I'm going to turn it over to Rick. I'm going to have Rick introduce himself because he has lots of past and present, and I'm not sure which he's representing today.
Hi, my name is Rick Hayes. Did my doctorate in cybersecurity back in Laurel, Maryland. I was stationed back east. Went on to Fort Meade, working with Joint Force Headquarters, DOTA, and NSA, Cyber Command, and DISA. Then on to Pentagon, and then found my way back home, civil service, working for CISA, which is where I met Mike Matthews. I was a cybersecurity state coordinator for a couple of years, supporting Nevada. It's great to be home. I'm working for NDOT now. I'm not here in an NDOT capacity. Okay, this is my own time. I took leave to be here today. Cybersecurity, the role that I looked at it as protecting our resources. How do we protect what we say, what we do? How do we keep things that are classified, or at least keeping them between us? When it comes to AI, I worked with one of the guys at NDOT. I won't give his name, but we put together a policy for AI at NDOT. And that was the first thing they told me to do. Hey, week one, get us a policy created. So we got right on that. We actually utilized AI to create the policy that we have for AI, which is kind of odd. And one of the biggest things that I learned about it is if you don't like the answer, ask a better question. And that's a great thing about AI. You can really change the outcome of what's there by asking a question exactly opposite. In fact, we did that when we wrote the policy. We would ask the question one way, and I thought, let's just try to flip it around. And so we did the inverse of the question. And it's funny the difference that we got in results. The second thing that we really looked at as we were going through that is what's the value of the data? So often we don't really understand the value of our data, what it is, where it's protected, where it flows to. When we start talking about metadata tagging and looking at the flow and where is data supposed to go, is it protected at all those locations? When you look at a zero trust architecture and understand so that it's not this hard outside shell with a soft marshmallow middle, we don't want that. All layers of the stack where that data flows at, we want to understand that, yes, the proper type of protection is in there. I always make a joke about it and say, why would you put a $10 lock on a $5 bicycle? Well, if you go back to COVID and you think about bicycles and how hard they were to come by during that time, how long are you going to be down if somebody steals your bicycle? What's your bicycle used for? If it was used for getting you groceries, you're going to have some adjustments to make. So when you think about wherever you're at with your data, how do you protect it at that level? And maybe you will be putting a $10 lock on a $5 bicycle because you have to look at that flow of the data. Where does the data go? And how do you know when it's out of your control? What kind of continuous monitoring have you put into place? And I don't think that a lot of organizations really understand the value of their data, much less how to monitor their data's path and where it's going. And the data classification, some organizations, I'm not going to say any names, that I've discovered over the course of years haven't really gotten a grasp of that. DOD does an excellent job of that. But when you start getting down to the state, city, county, and private level, what about critical infrastructure and how that data is being protected? What if it's, let's say, water systems, for instance? How well is that data protected? One of the things that our author Rex was talking about, the training of the systems, and that was one of the things that we're looking at NDOT. When you're looking at an AI tool, where does that tool live? Does it live outside of your firewall? It's like a vampire where you're inviting it in to come in and do some kind of analysis on your data. Where is that data going? What are you inviting in? Or do you want to buy your own tool and have that set behind the firewall so that you can search your data and have more control over what that tool is doing to your data, where that data is going to live once it's discovered? Because we look at data biases and how the biases happen. Do you know what kind of data lives on your systems? Do you want that getting leaked out? Maybe it's your emails. Maybe it's something that you've saved that you think has no significance, but could do some credible damage to you, your reputation, and can create some kind of mixed bias if it's not protected in that way. So it's a big piece I wanted to say. You think about the rate of change that we're dealing with. As AI starts to combine with quantum cryptography, that's like coffee. You know, what's the old joke? Coffee helping stupid people do stupid things faster. And that's what'll happen with AI if we're not controlling that tool to manage our data, manage our accesses as that data flows. One day you think it's protected, and the next day suddenly it's not. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, came out January of 22, I believe it was, with how to do risk management framework for AI. And so they created a playbook, and there's a whole page and resources on that. And outside of that, I'm ready to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. This is a challenging topic, so I'm going to start out with a question that I think really goes to the heart of the matter. And this can either go to Rex or Rick. Question is about recommendations for businesses and government organizations pursuing content moderation and the mitigation of misinformation. We've seen a lot of discussion about that, but how do we support essential services that businesses or governments may be implementing? And how do you prevent burnout from the staff that are desperately trying to contend with this contentious moderation? Rex.
It's a very difficult challenge. I think the first part is to recognize that the way that the moderation tools are set up, it's a game of whack-a-mole. It's very easy to create new accounts, and it can be somewhat of a troll in some of these forums and discussions. There is technology that can be applied to require a certain level of authentication for people who are commenting. And I think if you're tied in with a government and business organizations, login and verification of login will cut down on some of the bad acting. The burnout part is real. And one of the challenges is that the information of who is potentially a bad actor in terms of posting content, there isn't a networked shared information. I hope that as a community, we can provide some grace and support to the people that are trying to do their best job honestly and fairly and are under tremendous amount of pressure. And sometimes the things that we wouldn't say to people face to face, we post online. And I hope that we can create more civility in some of those discussions.
Not surprising. One of our commenters online said, OMG, totally overwhelmed with new information. So I'm going to turn that into a question. The technology world is moving at light speed right now. AI was barely a thing a year ago. We did an AI workshop with Rex and Caleb a year ago, and it was sort of new and interesting, and ChatGPT had just came out, and here we are a year later, and we're already launched into fake personalities influencing the way we think about voting. So for the totally overwhelmed, do you have some words of wisdom? Rex?
Take a deep breath. When you go back to the history of elections and misinformation, and it goes back to the founding fathers, fake newspapers being created to influence point of view and so forth. So if there is one hope that I have is that in an open society, we will inoculate ourselves faster to dealing with how to process and sift through what is good information, what isn't, and how do we crowdsource bad information and identify misinformation and deepfakes faster, and that we will cycle through a lot better in that process than some of the systems that are closed, like China, for example. But that is a hope. Last election cycle, when right after the election, the words of election was stolen, what I realized as a data scientist is I had never studied the process for voting and how the data moved through, but I've had a lot of experience looking at how data moves through and how to verify it and validate it and cross-check it and triangulate around it. I took an effort where I worked with both the left and the right. I worked on the Biden side, going door to door, curing votes to see what that process was like and what was happening there. I worked with a group called the Trump Digital Army Election Integrity Division and took their checklist of things they wanted to have done in Nevada in terms of checking the data, and I did every single one of them. I mean, I did find a couple outliers, like I found people who got ballots who weren't eligible to get ballots. They were under 18. There was 3 of them in Washoe. I called 2 of them because they had their phone numbers listed. Their moms told them not to turn it in. I felt a lot better afterwards. I traced back how that clerical error happened. The more skills that we give to our citizens to be able to do data science, to be able to analyze information, to know about AI, to understand how it works, to work on both sides and to have friends on both sides and to do the investigation. I think the better off we will be and the faster we'll inoculate ourselves. I hope we do see some program like what Finland has in place. Big border with Russia. They've had a lot of experience on thinking about how do we train people to think critically about media and media literacy.
Excellent. Thanks, Rex. Caleb, do you want to add to advice for the overwhelmed?
Yeah, I will say from the technology point of view, one thing that's fortunate is that this isn't an unsolvable technological problem on misinformation. What's really interesting, actually, is that OpenAI internally has had a tool for around 2 years with nearly 100% accuracy in recognizing their own AI-generated content. But actually, that tool's not been released. They've debated over it for around 2 years, and for good reason from their point of view. Like, a lot of people who use ChatGPT probably would not use it if it was widely possible to recognize who is using AI-generated content. So in a lot of ways, some of the misinformation is a social problem of like, how do we get the companies that have the technology to recognize their own AI-generated content to actually allow other people to use that? Because the ability to recognize AI-generated content or AI-generated images, the technology for those things has been developed. There's ways that you can watermark images that are really hard to remove, that make it so that if you generate an image using a certain tool, you're able to tell. So the technology's there. At least we know there are solutions to these problems, and there's lots of ways that we can make them better. The difficulty is, how do you get actual companies to decide to use those tools, or how do we create some sort of authentication method so that people who are creating their own models to generate images have some separation from the people who are like authenticated in some kind of way?
Excellent. Thank you. For the overwhelmed, I'll channel Mike Matthews, because he said this on numerous occasions, is remember the source of where you're getting information. If you're concerned about election procedures and what's happening in the election, go to the election office. Don't take information from a third party. Rick, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add to that is data loss prevention is something that when you talked about government agencies and other local organizations, understanding that they've got a duty and a responsibility to protect the data, and they should be continuously monitoring to make sure that that data is not leaking out in a way that they don't want. And that goes right down to partnering with their public information officers so that they understand the proper messaging and they understand when a word that's doesn't reflect the truth of what's trying to get out there, so they can get ahead of that. That's a big part of partnering within the organization and informing the public. The metadata tagging so that they can monitor those lines of communications for validity to make sure that that's the message that they're after. I think that those are essential.
Excellent. Thank you. A couple questions. Caleb, I'm going to bounce this one to you because I know you talk a lot about guidelines. Say you're a private company and you want to use AI using your own internal information. Is there a way that you can set up guardrails so that that information doesn't get automatically shared with the rest of the world?
Yeah, so fortunately, a lot of the AI providers like Anthropic or OpenAI have options to opt out in training. So ChatGPT, even if you're on the free version, there's an option in settings to decide to opt out using your data for training. Anthropic, I think you can opt out as well. And there's even an option for both of them if you talk with the company directly to have zero data retention. So your data is not actually at any point retained from them. Like, they get the data for a second, but then it's almost immediately deleted. There are options to make sure that your data doesn't get shared on the outside. I think the more difficult part of the problem is that the AI providers do a good job of making sure you can opt out. LinkedIn in the last few weeks had an automatically opt-in option for their training on your data. I think that's the real thing to worry about, is not necessarily the direct AI providers. If you're using ChatGPT, they've had to think a lot about privacy, so they have done a good job with that. They've had to think a lot about privacy, so they've set up things for that. The other websites you use, so LinkedIn, other ones that they can kind of just train on your data, and they might not ever decide to give you that option to not train on their data. So it depends on the company you're talking with. The ones that are really focused on AI, I think, do a good job allowing you to protect yourself. But just being on the internet in general, the content you produce is often public to some level, and there's not so much you can do to protect that kind of information.
Excellent. Thank you. Rick, I'm going to bounce this to you. In the AI world and the practitioners like yourself, who is doing the best job at understanding the impacts of AI on elections right now? So you gave that example of the Wall Street Journal investigative reporter. So we have a question specifically tied to that, which was who did the investigation to understand how much AI influenced things like the 2016 election here, the Brexit vote? And then who do you turn to be the best of the police force in the world? Who do we go to look at those investigations?
I think we're playing catch up is the problem. The velocity is pretty significant. The amount of money that is going into investigative journalism has been decreasing because the advertising model is broken. If you can support good investigative journalism, you should. The Wall Street Journal has done some wonderful work in that, but they only have so many resources, and the stories oftentimes come out after it's too late. In terms of a proactive part in the US government, the FBI has been doing work trying to find fake accounts. Meta and Google are also trying to find fake accounts and trying to turn that off. They have a little bit of a challenged incentive because on the one hand, they want to maintain credibility. And so turning off fake accounts is important. On the other hand, they could do more for authentication and to make it a lot harder for these fake accounts. And they haven't done that yet. If it makes it harder for people to adopt the platform and less people to come on or less people to use it, they're not going to do it because it goes against their economic model. I think we should be investing more in some of our cybersecurity, and I think we can actually do a lot with AI. There is some really great work being done inside Homeland Security and FBI looking at this because there is a huge concern with North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, even if they're not trying to influence a specific candidate, trying to create more dissension and getting us to a place where we don't trust each other, we don't listen to each other, we don't have these civil discussions. That is something that we can all unite around and saying that's not good for our society, no matter what your political persuasion is. But there's a lot more we should be doing.
I have a question for you about the algorithms. I'm combining a few questions here. Remember the old days when we all watched Star Trek? And the computers and the machines in those days were very logical. We had Spock. No emotions. The appearance is, from what you presented, is that much of the AI algorithms appear to be much more emotionally driven than what we would consider to be logically driven. And that makes it so that you're preying on people's emotions. Is that intentional?
It's a feature, not a bug, technologists would say. Part of, I think, why I'm trying to lean in on the public education is I feel slightly guilty having done some of the first neural networks on the internet. And the idea was to try to figure out what could we say that would bring people back to Wired's website. And at that time, the usage of a website would be maybe once a week or maybe once a day to check the news for a few minutes. And we didn't have these things where, like in TikTok, you might use it for 3 hours straight or 4 hours straight. And you could see in that video within 30 minutes, the AI already had you pegged and what type of content was going to get you. We call it in AI the objective function. What is it we're trying to solve for? We're trying to solve for engagement because that's how they make money. That's how they sell ads, is keeping you engaged, looking at more. It isn't the AI that's doing it. It's us doing it to ourselves. It's what our own human nature does in terms of content. The fact that we're more likely to click on a headline that creates anxiety than joy is us. That's us as a human being doing that, and the algorithm is echoing it back to us and reinforcing it. Now, the other part of the story is that the technologists that build these systems have more of a moral responsibility than they've ever accepted, which is maybe we shouldn't be focusing on the objective function of engagement. Maybe we should be focusing on something that had to do with longer term health and happiness. And while there isn't an economic model as directly tied to engagement, if we were doing that, the content that we get back looks a little different. So the key thing to keep in mind, though, is that the problem with these algorithms is that they pay attention to a very faint signal, which is engagement. So imagine you have an ad that's about QAnon, or a message about QAnon, a story about QAnon, a post about QAnon, and only 1 out of 300 people click on it. and 1 out of 500 people like it. Very small number of people. But because there's so much content that we see and so often we don't engage with anything, that's enough of a signal to then say, well, then, hey, what's the characteristic of that person that liked it? Oh, they happen to be a Christian living in Wilmington, Delaware, and they happen to be a female and a mom. And that's why it shows up in Carol's feed, not because Carol said she wanted it, not because she would even like it, but because a very small number of people did something and then it amplified. And it's really that process of the amplification that I'm most concerned about, because in the process of showing content again and again, it normalizes it. It feels more rational. It feels maybe more popular. And we know from a lot of psychological research that we do in advertising that if I can simply make something more familiar to you, you're more likely to like it. And it's a bizarre phenomenon that is deeply embedded in our psychology. So I blame us as people, but the algorithms definitely play a role, and we could take more responsibility to try to do better.
Thank you, Rex. Caleb, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because that same kind of algorithm is just starting to happen with generative AI like ChatGPT, with reinforcement learning. You might notice if you disagree with the AI in almost any case, it will apologize and say sorry and kind of defer to you. So it has some level of flattery actually built in, because when people get responses from the AI, they can like give it a thumbs up or thumbs down, and the AI learns a little bit based off of that. So over time, people have sort of removed away the ability for the AI to effectively disagree with you, because it's not great when you say something and then the AI comes back as like, no, I don't agree. We prefer to be flattered a little bit, has made it so over time, the AI actually really can't disagree with you effectively. And it becomes sort of funny if you ask it to do something like a really simple math equation, and then you say like, oh, I think you made a mistake. Even if it's like, what's 5 + 5? And it gets the answer is 10. If you disagree with it, it'll be like, oh, sorry, you're right. Actually, it must be something different. And then like try and come up with some absurd explanation for how the answer has to be something different. And that's going to get amplified in the future when people start having more effective algorithms for training the AI. We've already seen that there's ways that you can get these really complex behavior by trying to train these AIs to give responses in a way that humans like. So Anthropic released a paper a few months ago showing that you could train these kind of like sleeper agents that would agree and like flatter the people. But in certain types of topics, they would randomly engage in like a very specific behavior. So maybe you could tell them to spread some misinformation campaign, and through any conversation through them, you wouldn't be able to figure that out, that that's their goal. The AI could hide its goal from the actual people that were talking with it. So the emotional capacity of the AI makes our interactions with it really complex, and it becomes even more complex when it starts training on the ways that humans interact with it, because now the AI has some ability to hide its intentions, or it has some ability to start flattering its users because that's what they prefer, and that's what, as Rex says, creates more engagement. So yeah, it's definitely very complicated, and that emotional aspect being added to computers does open a whole new world that's really hasn't been considered in the past, because we haven't had computers that talk back to us and can convince us of things that we hadn't thought of before.
So gone are the days of Spock. With that, I'm going to let Rick close out. What do you want to say to this group, putting on your national security hat, about the security of our elections, given AI and the adversaries that are out there? What is your parting words to this group?
The integrity of the data for elections really came into question during and post the election last time we went through this, and that's been a platform. We lose the faith in our election system. What else do we lose faith in? So it's important, as Mike would say, consider the source, validate the data. That would be the biggest thing. Take the time. Don't just take things on face value and run with it. Validate the data as much as you can. Sometimes that's tough. And when you consider that source, are you looking at both sides of the aisle on the data when you collect it and when you get it? Or are you just jumping off of a 15-second thing you heard or some headlines we saw? You go back to the Second World War, right? And they say, never trust anything you hear and only half of what you read. Here we are in the same boat again. Funny how history repeats itself. That value of the data, whether you're the organization pushing the data out, does it align with what your organization is truly trying to say and what you truly believe in the value of that data? And that you have a responsibility as an organization to go out and clear up any of those issues, challenge those issues when somebody is putting out something counter to what your organization's message is. And you, as the reader or listener, have that same responsibility to look on both sides of the aisle, because the consequences are our freedom.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rex. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you. NSFers. We appreciate seeing you here. We look forward to seeing you back. Have a safe and wonderful day.